Well, one of the concerns, however, is that the time that those promises were made for many of those pensions, we were having things like federal revenue sharing. That was before we decided to have 3 wars on our plate, now that Libya's been added. When you look at what's happened to the defense budget, even since the year 2000, part of the reason that states are struggling is they're not getting federal dollars back to the states that would help ease some of this crisis. And economic theory suggests that when the private sector is struggling, as it has been since the meltdown, that one of the virtues of having a public sector is that you expand jobs in that area in order to act like a sort of bellows that sucks up all these excess workers. Because otherwise, we're here at Michigan State University, where I also teach. Why would anybody send their son or daughter to college nowadays if there's no job for them at the other end? If the private sector is shrinking and now the public sector is shrinking and wages are going down for both, why invest in a college career? Isn't that what leads a country like ours to go into decline?
Well, sure, and I think there's a strong case to be made for, government investments in some key areas. And I think everyone agrees that education is absolutely critical to the future. And I think it starts in pre-K and goes all the way through community colleges, which in Michigan we have a very good community college system. So I think those kind of investments are critical. But at the same time, the economic realities are, how do we fund all this? So I think it's a very difficult challenge for us to make sure we're making key investments while also dealing with, as a state, we can't print money. We can't go into debt like the federal government does. So we're much more constrained at this level. Most of these pension promises, though, were made well before federal revenue sharing. I mean, the Detroit pension system started in 1940. A lot of the other ones did as well. So it really goes way back before federal revenue sharing. In 1960, there's a report from Wayne State that said Detroit's pensions are going to be a huge financial burden to the city. And at that time, nobody cared because everything was going fine and great, and the auto industry was booming. So it was pretty much ignored. There's been warnings for a long time on some of these things that both sides have just ignored. And I think now we're all going to have to come to grips with, we had a state, particularly Michigan, that was well off, that had a booming manufacturing system, and now we don't. And that's the reality we're faced with. We're not going to get the jobs back easily, or certainly quickly. And so we're going to have to deal with those realities. And I think I would agree that investments in education and some things of that nature are critical. I mean, educational attainment is a number one factor that probably determines where a state economy goes. So I think both governors, Granholm and Snyder, probably support that. So, it's a challenge for us. It's a challenge to find, what are all the priorities, where's the money coming from, and these are the difficult choices our leaders face.
It does. It seems that's why, many of us are concerned about the corporate tax cuts. At the same time, MSU is going to take a 15% hit this year. So it's a little, it's not clear to me that the budget reflects the commitment to education, K-12 and higher ed, that we would all like to see. Again, there's choices as what you spend your money on, but there's also choices as to who you give tax breaks to. So that's another concern. So
absolutely,
I think that's a fight worth having at this point. I think it was interesting. Naomi Klein wrote the book Shock Doctrine, when she argues that at the federal level, one of the challenges is that much as the meltdown may have hurt a lot of people and certainly caused trillions of dollars of wealth to disappear globally overnight, the reality is that that kind of fear makes workers more tractable as well. I'm not sure something like this. I think we saw maybe 4,000 or 5,000 at the Capitol the other day. I think we would have seen 15,000 10 years ago if someone had tried this. So it almost seems that there is a sense that there's a sort of opportunistic effort to try to ram through things that are ideological goals from the past and try to make them happen now under crisis, because people are so afraid. I think they're very afraid of the future. They see gas prices rising, home values continue to fall. I mean, it really doesn't seem an easy way to get out of this economic trap, especially given the fact that in this era, I don't see where a whole bunch of new jobs come from.
Yeah, no, I understand people's fears about this law. I mean, I can assure people, I've been involved in this from the beginning. I honestly can say it's not driven by ideology. It is not driven by what some people think. I mean, it really is driven by a simple reality that we have significant local government stress, which I think the state can do several things to affect. I mean, I think it can reduce mandates, it can maybe do some things with the funding. But even if you do that, you're still going to face a lot of fiscal stress. Even if you fixed all those other things, it's not going to fix the problem overall. And that there is going to be a stress. You can't lose 1 million jobs and not have fiscal stress. It's just a simple math of it. And so, and the problem is, if one local government messes up, it affects everyone. It's a collective problem, because if one local government, say a Flint, goes under, you know, its effect on the bond ratings would affect all of Michigan cities. So it's a collective problem that one group can affect everyone else. And the state government, as the sovereign entity, has the responsibility to basically oversee all local government. Local governments are creatures of the state. They don't exist without state authority. They can't make decisions unless the state says they can do things. I mean, that's the way our system is set up. It's the way every state is set up. And so the reality is the state has a responsibility to ensure that local governments pay their bills, that they make payroll. I mean, if you want to talk about workers, you could have situations where the payroll can't be made. Okay, so that affects workers very directly and immediately. So, I mean, you can face the reality that, yes, this seems like martial law. I don't believe it is martial law, for one thing. And secondly, it's just the reality that we're going to have tools that are necessary in some extreme cases to address fiscal stress and to avoid bankruptcy, which would hurt all of us. So I don't see it as an ideological move. I see it as what is a necessary thing given the structure of our federal system in Michigan, that we're state and local governments and how they fit together.
I think one of the reasons that people are concerned about the ideology is we see groups like ALEC and the Mackinac Center. They have had, in essence, they've been think tanks on the right for a long time that have been looking at these kind of reforms. It seems as if they had all of these things waiting in a hopper someplace. All this sample legislation for the emergency financial managers, and my, I don't remember Rick Snyder running on the platform that he would install emergency financial managers, threaten collective bargaining. I mean, it seemed that was kept under wraps, and he was very vague about what the policies would be. Yet the moment that they came into office, all this legislation was sort of prepackaged, just waiting. Pick it up off the table, go to the Republican Governors Association meeting with John Kasich and Scott Walker, and you're all going to pass the same body of laws at the same time. It just seemed opportunistic. So you may be paying a penalty in your training for the fact that this appears to be rammed through in a very short period of time.
Well, it was, and it was clearly a major priority of the governor to push it through quickly, given that a lot of people who are not partisan were telling him this is a serious problem. I mean, whether we agree there's other parts of this, I mean, when he came into office, the fundamental reality is you have governments on the brink of bankruptcy. And it was felt that there needed to be a stronger legislation because we did not want bankruptcies. If there were more bankruptcies of municipalities in Michigan, that would be very destructive. I mean, for everyone. You know, I mean, governments have to borrow, and if they have to, I mean, we could have been Greece, basically. We could have been facing massive interest rates, and we would all pay for it with less services. So I don't agree that this, I never saw the Mackinac Center involved in this. This was done. There was a panel that helped the governor from very different groups, but not the Mackinac Center, helped put together the proposal for this law. It was ready when it was done while the governor was preparing to take office, so it was true that was ready. It was a major push on Treasury's initiative to get it through the system quickly, because there was a perception it was going to be needed, not because, I just don't agree. I don't think it was an ideological thing. I think it was a thing of this, it was because this governor is a CPA, and I think he's looking at it as a CPA that we have to have the tools to do what's needed. I don't believe it was driven by anything I saw in terms of ideology. I think it was driven by necessity, and even things like state aid. I mean, what the governor said is that local governments can get the state aid back. They have to do certain things in exchange for that, which includes intergovernmental cooperation, transparency. I think those are all things we think are important. So the cities that are losing state aid at this point in the 2012 budget can get all that money back if they have 3 or 4 things they're going to have to do to get it. So I think in that sense the money will be available ultimately.
One last question. All of this will be really up in the air if we don't up the debt ceiling. by June, by the end of June. What would that do to Michigan?
That would be disastrous. I mean, regardless of ideology, I think the debt ceiling. I think everyone knows over the long term we do have to manage our debt better than we have. But now is not the time to play games with the debt ceiling. I mean, a default on our debt would be economically disastrous, and I don't care if you're left or right. That's the reality. So I think it's a very dangerous game. I think even talking about it is dangerous, honestly, and I think we just need to do it, and then we do. I think even President Obama has pretty clearly stated we've got to get our debt under control. That is clear to everyone, I think, on both sides, and so we'll need a plan, and I think, the president's put a plan out, the Republicans have put a plan out, and, I think we would hope that something does come forward over time, but it needs to be thoughtful and well thought out. It doesn't need to be done, I think, in the next 6 months. I think, most economists would say there's at least several years, if not even a decade, where we can fix these problems. So I don't think it has to be done immediately. But yeah, I think the debt needs to be addressed, but I don't think the debt ceiling is the place to do it.
That's really, when they keep talking about cutting up the credit cards, that's suggesting that you're not going to pay your credit card bill, isn't it?
Absolutely. And that's very, it's irresponsible. I think anyone would agree that's not the responsible choice. So
Because the communities that are financially stressed in Michigan now, if that happened, would overnight find themselves having to pay more for any money they borrowed.
Absolutely. It would affect state borrowing. I mean, the state has to borrow a lot of money right now because of our economic stress. We borrow $1 billion a year. If we have to pay 18% interest like Greece, I mean, then we're going to have to cut even deeper into education. So, I mean, it's simply not a responsible choice. I think even the bond rating agencies, S&P, have said, it's not something that has to be done right this minute. It has to be done over time. So that, to me, is a common sense. That's what we need to do. And I think everyone seems to me would agree that common sense, is what should rule here.
I would hope so. Any last comments? Things I haven't asked I should have?
I don't think so.
Good. Thank you.